What does it mean to be a man in today's world? Well, a flood of social media influencers claim to have the answer, but why is it up to them to make the rules? Over my more than 11 years as a successful entrepreneur, as well as an internationally published author in the behavioral sciences, I've realized that it's up to each individual man, through the power of our own independent thinking, to decide what being a man really looks like. And in this video, I'll share 3 books that will help guide you through that reasoning process to help you achieve true success as a man. And the first book on this list is King, Warrior, Magician, Lover by Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette. If we listen to influencers such as Andrew Tate, we often hear them claim that nowadays men have become weak. And I agree. Have you ever heard so much shrill complaining, whining, and grievance from a grown man? I mean, who knew masculinity could be so fragile? Well, the answer is that true masculinity isn't. And my biggest takeaway from this book is what real masculine strength and power means. Contrary to what influencers like Tate want you to believe, it doesn't mean power over other people. It means power over ourselves. Once we gain power over ourselves, everything else in our lives follows from it. The king, warrior, magician, and lover, according to Jungian psychology, are 4 archetypes of masculinity, and in order to achieve self-mastery, we as men need to focus on balancing all 4. The king represents internal stability and the voice of reason. According to this archetype, a good king recognizes and rewards deserving individuals, tries to understand them, cares about them, and recognizes their true worth. An immature king, the authors explain, becomes either an oppressor, trying to gain power by putting others down, or an abdicator, abandoning his responsibilities out of fear. Which qualities do you currently possess? Are you a mature or immature king? Well, as we review these 4 archetypes, take note of which qualities you currently have and which ones you need to work on. Because as the authors emphasize, part of what it means to be a man is to cultivate humility in order to grow. Which takes us to the next archetype the authors discuss, the warrior. The warrior represents discipline, strength, self-control, skill, and loyalty. The greatest warriors, as the authors explain, are ones who can master their own minds, ones who are always honing their skills and perfecting their craft, and ultimately, the warrior is willing to endure great hardships and countless defeats in pursuit of his goal. But nowadays, what do we see? Well, many of us have become immature warriors. Back when I first started my business in direct sales, I did about 10 appointments, got awful results, and then almost concluded I couldn't succeed. But my mentor at the time simply asked me, okay, but what did you learn from those 10 appointments? Where are your notes on them? And what are the key skills you concluded you need to practice? But the reality was, I didn't take notes on any of them. I hadn't practiced any of the skills I needed, and in fact, I therefore wasn't yet worthy of getting the results I wanted. Ask yourself, how much have you truly committed to failing again and again in order to learn and progress? Who are you pointing your finger at? And is that truly productive? Well, that's where the next archetype the authors discuss becomes especially relevant, and that is the magician. This one represents knowledge and wisdom, studying, learning, seeking to understand complex subjects, and the magician is a feature of masculinity that has been almost entirely lost in the modern era. The ancient Greek philosopher Plato wrote in his great work, The Republic, that it was not enough for a man to be physically strong. Physical strength alone, he claimed, made a man useless as a citizen. He undoubtedly learned this from his mentor Socrates, who was not only a great philosopher, but also was one of Athens' greatest warriors during its golden age. But today, scroll through social media and what kind of men do we see? We see guys that post gym selfies and claim to be red-pilled because now they've escaped the matrix and realize that school is useless. Now, don't get me wrong. I love the gym. I spend literally hours there every day. I also have major issues with the education system and how it's not designed to give you a real education. I actually have a whole video about that. However, do you see the problem with rejecting education altogether? Do you see the problem with focusing on only getting gains in the gym while completely neglecting gains in our mind? You see, the point isn't to accept what I say about masculinity or accept what anybody else says about it for that matter. The point is to learn how to think for ourselves about it. But we can only learn how to think for ourselves if we dedicate effort to learning how to think clearly and grow our critical thinking skills. ask yourself, what are you doing on a daily basis to challenge your beliefs? Because let's be honest, that's the real way to become an independent thinker. And that brings us to the last of the 4 archetypes, which is the lover. The lover, as the authors point out, is a source of desire, passion, and joy. As men, we're taught not to express our emotions, but that's exactly what's causing us to fail as men. The authors highlight a brutal statistic regarding fatherless homes. Although the rate has stayed nearly steady, more than 20% of fathers end up leaving their families, and that includes my own father. I remember back when I was 11 years old and my father left our family. From what I understand, there were just so many thoughts and feelings he simply grew up not knowing how to express. And eventually, it all simply couldn't be bottled up anymore and came out in destructive ways. You see, society teaches men that we should not be emotional. And in one sense, that's because we associate being emotional with being feminine. But that couldn't be further from the truth. Arguably one of the most masculine men in Western history, the Emperor Marcus Aurelius of ancient Rome, notably cried on many occasions. He was one of the great Stoic thinkers. You see, Aurelius understood the power of channeling our emotions as men. If we don't acknowledge our emotions and learn how to name them, we can never channel them into virtues such as courage, resilience, and the pursuit of justice. Which of these 4 archetypes do you most identify with? Which of these do you still need to balance? Well, now that we understand these archetypes, we can combine them with the concepts from the next book on our list to completely transform our reach and influence as men. And that book is The 5 Levels of Leadership by John Maxwell. Now, why do I include a book on leadership in this list? After all, women are just as well equipped as men to be great leaders. Well, the truth is that we as men have been lied to regarding what leadership looks like for a man. We're constantly surrounded by role models of male leadership that are, again, centered around whining, complaining, grievance, and the pursuit of power at all costs. But John Maxwell is a true leadership expert, having built organizations of leaders spanning thousands of people and multiple countries. And this book made a huge impact on me when I was at the lowest point in my life and could barely afford $20 in groceries for the week or a $400 rent. This was truly one of the books that helped me turn it all around. Maxwell identifies 5 levels we all must pass through if we want to be effective leaders. And think about it. Being an effective man takes leadership, whether that's as a role model to our children, as a leader in our community, or as the most effective person in our job or business enterprise. The first level of leadership is what Maxwell calls position leadership. Leaders who operate at this level tend to focus on prestige, titles, and position above the mission of the organization. As such, they don't lead by their own example, but instead simply tell others what to do. Have you ever had a boss who points out everything you do wrong, never recognizes anything you do right, never takes responsibility or admits he's wrong, and simply sits in his corner office expecting you to bow down to him and worship him? Well, this is a classic sign of an insecure leader. On the outside, these kinds of leaders project strength, but on the inside, they are incredibly weak. Who do you know who fits this description? Any influencers or public figures come to mind? Well, it's up to all of us to make it to that next level, what Maxwell calls permission leadership. On this level, leaders forget about titles and positions. Instead, they start to realize that if they simply care about their team and their people and invest in them, those same people will be inspired and motivated to pursue the mission. Back when I was building sales teams, I learned this the hard way. I often tried to get people to do things and perform tasks and got frustrated when they wouldn't. In my mind, I asked myself, what's wrong with these people? Are they stupid or something? But that's not the true thinking of a leader. After my team started to fall apart, I learned my lesson, and the next time around, I started out by making sure I was always doing what was in the best interest of the team, not what was only in my own best interest. Who is a leader you can think of who only does what is in his own best interest and only thinks about himself? It might have even been you at some point. The fact is, and the research bears this out, that leaders who do not get to this permission stage can definitely lead through fear or even threats of violence, but at some point, their team will always abandon them and their authority will crumble. And that takes us to what Maxwell calls production leadership, which is the third level. With a solid foundation of relationship and trust among the team, the leader now must lead by example. The leader must produce if he wants his team to produce. And this applies throughout our lives. Want people around you to be healthier? Start by eating right and exercising yourself. Want people around you to be more helpful to you or kind to you? Try being helpful and kind first. Want to make your community, state, or country a better place? Then look in the mirror first. It is an established fact in psychology that over time people will model others they look up to. So why not be that person people look up to? The fourth and fifth levels of leadership are fairly related, so we'll discuss both together. Those two levels are what Maxwell calls people development and the pinnacle. Once you move through the first three levels, then and only then can you begin to actively mentor and guide others. And honestly, this is one of the biggest things we lack as men today: effective mentors. How many times have you wished you had someone to guide you through the steps of life, but there was just nobody willing to do it? That should be our fathers, right? But as we've seen, not every man is lucky enough to have a father in his life. And among those of us who do have fathers in our lives, how inspirational of a leader are they for us in our own life? Well, so many of us lack this kind of mentorship. And so once again, we seek out influencers who fill this void. Influencers who do nothing but lead us down the darkest path of destructive masculinity, disrespect of women, and the pursuit of power above virtue. But ultimately, we don't have any excuse. I highly recommend reading this book, and let's all start becoming the kind of inspirational mentor other young men are looking for. The last book on our list is Ego is the Enemy by Holliday. Holliday has done a ton of work to reintroduce the modern world to the ancient philosophy of Stoicism, and as we've seen previously, Marcus Aurelius was one of them. As Holliday points out, one of Aurelius's core principles of Stoicism was to be wary of ego. You see, for us men, we're taught implicitly that ego is everything. Be outwardly tough, show aggression, dominate others, and show you're better than everyone. But do you realize that all this behavior is a classic sign of insecurity? In other words, this kind of ego-driven behavior actually just shows how weak someone is. And ego can appear in many ways. I did a live stream not too long ago, and on it, a young man kept going on and on about how he's tried so many things. E-commerce, Instagram marketing, dropshipping, and like 2 other things. And he's failed at all of it, and so he has given up on all of it. And so what's the point of being virtuous or trying to live a good life? And I literally said right back to him, really? That's all you've tried? I've failed way more than you. The point is, ego can also look like wanting instant gratification and focusing on what I can get versus what I can give. And for what it's worth, that's what I really like about Gary Vee. He regularly rails against all the scammy get-rich-quick online BS, and this is part of what so many young men have fallen into. Especially if you're a young man who wants to go into entrepreneurship, please, please, please learn from my years of failures, mistakes, and successes. Focus more on the value you can provide instead of what you can get from other people, and you will ultimately become successful. But ego can show up in darker ways too. Recent research has shown that men who adopt dating advice from red pill influencers end up using manipulative tactics to coerce their partners, which ends up creating chaotic, mistrustful relationships. Guys, why do you really think you can't find a partner? It's because your potential partner wants to be treated as a person and not as property. It's not actually that complicated. What other books do you think are important reads for men? And what do you think makes a real man? Whatever your answer is, just remember, make sure your opinion is truly yours. Practice truly independent thinking, because independent thinking, that's the real red pill. If you want to keep leveling up your critical thinking to make a massive impact not only on your own life, but also on the lives of countless others, then be sure to watch this next video.